Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare.
Hey guys, it's Dani. Today we are talking all about growing orchids in pots without drainage. Is it possible? Absolutely, as you can see. But I will start by saying that if you are an absolute beginner, never had an orchid in your life, or you just purchased your very first orchid, maybe postpone this. You can watch and hopefully learn something from my tips. But first, I would suggest you go through the process of getting to know your orchid in the safest way possible. So I will link you to another video down below, which takes you through all of the steps that should put you on the right track to growing your orchid. But let's say that you already are pretty acquainted with orchids and for whatever reason you are interested in growing them in pots without drainage. Well, I hope my tips and tricks will help you out because yes, I am growing some of my orchids in no drainage pots and there are some advantages to that. As you can see, I have my bulbophyllums and we will pot yet another bulbophyllum today, show you how I do things and just talk a little bit about things you should keep in mind. And speaking about getting a little bit out of my comfort zone, let me tell you my latest thing, what I'm actually doing at the moment. It's actually sewing, and I was super inspired by a class that I saw on Skillshare.
Skillshare is the largest online learning community for people that are curious and hungry for learning new skills. Here you will find thousands of creative classes in countless categories such as decorating, design, illustration, photography, sewing, and so much more. Now, following my knowing how to design stuff from last time, Skillshare's learning paths landed me to a sewing class taught by Bernadette Banner. And boy, was this quite the revelation.
Now let me show you something. You might have seen this like in some of my videos. Yeah, do you know that this button actually fell off? It wasn't sewn properly and I had to sew it myself. And I did. You know what? I'm multi-talented. I sewed myself. Yes, it's thicker than the others, but it stays put. Yes, I am a gift to this world, but that's about it. That's all I can do with sewing. And I'll tell you a real story, a funny story. I was in high school and my pants literally ripped before I had to go to school. So I sat down and I started to sew them and I went to school. But when I came back, I noticed they split again. Now, my luck was that it wasn't very high, so hopefully nobody noticed. But they split open because I didn't sew them properly.
And now, being Captain Hindsight, I know exactly why they split. I made a run-in stitch. I didn't even secure it. So, of course, it didn't last. The least I could have done is a back stitch. But Sally, I'm about 20 years too late for that. In any case, this class was highly informational for me, and you know what? I'm sure in my life I will have to sew and stitch things yet again. And I do recommend it to everybody who's a beginner with sewing.
And now I'm just realizing I'm pronouncing this word wrong, right? Is it sewing? Yes. So if you're thinking you will never need to know how to saw, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, guess again, sometimes you do have to know how to do it properly if you don't want to get embarrassed in front of the hundreds of people. Yeah, so that's my little story, and that's what I'm up to lately. I'm literally learning how to properly sew. Some of you will get a giggle every time I say this. But anyway,
Skillshare's learning paths are a great way to structure your learning experience, as they might actually cover some aspects about particular topics you didn't even know you needed to know. The best part is you can try Skillshare for free today. The first 500 of you to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare to browse through all of their classes and see if it's for you. Nothing to lose, only to gain. Thank you all for supporting the people who support me.
Righty, so with that said, let's get back to the video. So first and foremost, I will start with some theory. As always, you'll have chapters down below. And lastly, we're gonna actually pot something. First and foremost, what orchids are, let's say, most adequate for non-drainage pots? Well, definitely all orchids can be grown like that if you're talented enough. Not really talented, but if you're skilled enough. See what I did there? But we have to agree that more moisture-loving plants will actually do better because this setup definitely stays or can stay a little bit more moist than traditional setups. Hence why, or it is one of the reasons why I'm using it, especially with bulbophyllums. My bulbophyllums have always taken a hit in the heat that I live in and in my lack of watering on time. This one is a little bit dehydrated, but it's pulling through now. So I opted for something like this because it simply retains more water. Even if I have, my decorative pots to catch the water, it's still an opening. Water still evaporates. And I find that for some bulbophyllums, it's just not enough. So I would say things like bulbophyllums, oncidiums, masdevallias, if you can grow them, stuff that really enjoy their moisture. Obviously, they might be more adequate for this style of growing because their roots are innately evolved to tolerate more moisture, maybe less air. This does not mean that what we have here is not airy. It is airy, you're gonna see. But as I was saying, depending on your environment and your skill level, you can make this work with any orchid. I can make a cattleya grow in this. I would just have to be a little bit more careful. I would have a few nightmares every once in a while that I drowned my cattleya, but I can make it work. However, I'm just sticking to bulbophyllums for now. Second question you might have, what type of pots or containers are better suited for this? And the answer is whatever you like best. So I have here a container that one of my lovely viewers sent me. Look how pretty it is. It does not have drainage. It does have some soft little legs, so I can put it on furniture, but it is not unglazed. It is actually glazed on the surface. So you can go for something decorative like this. You can even go for terracotta, unglazed terracotta. However, if you use that, make sure that on the bottom you have glazing, because unglazed terracotta can, yes, transpire water and definitely can keep you safer from drowning your orchid. But if you're thinking you can put it on furniture or something like that, don't, because it will be moist and it will affect whatever surface you're planning on putting it on. If you have tiles or something, definitely can put it there. But wood and stuff that swell in moist conditions is a no-no. So be careful with unglazed stuff. However, you can use glazed stuff as well. And what I have here are just some food bowls. And this I have for a lot of years. I actually used it in the past and I got these recently. And look at that, they're the same. I did not plan to purchase two of the same things, but they're the same. So for bulbophyllums especially, and orchids that crawl rather than grow upright, some oncidiums can be climbers, as you know. Bulbophyllums not so much, they tend to crawl. For bulbophyllums, I do enjoy these food bowls, and they can be even larger. These are the tinier ones because I had tinier bulbophyllums, but they will get upgraded in time. So basically you can choose whatever you like, from food bowls to actual pots or decorative containers. You can choose whatever material you like, as long as it's safe. There aren't many materials that are not orchid safe. I would suggest that if you're using plastic, you make sure the orchid doesn't get too top heavy, because they can do that. So maybe go for something wider. And also, if you are using a metal type of container, make sure it's not a material that can rust. Rust doesn't really affect anything. It's just iron oxide. But I think in time that rust can eat through the metal and your container might start to leak. I don't know how long the process actually takes. You can leave a comment, but that can happen. So be careful with these materials. Other than that, you can choose whatever you like. Now, what potting mix should we use? I would say something that either works in your environment in normal pots, or you can make it be both airy and absorbent at the same time. What do I mean by this? So as you know, I use a lot of sphagnum moss in my pots, and it works great because I have a hot environment. However, not all of you like to use sphagnum moss. Well, I would suggest in this type of container, you do use a little bit of sphagnum moss, even if in your environment sphagnum moss, as it is, it's not the greatest. And I'll tell you why. It evens everything out, and you need everything to be very even, because at the bottom, you're gonna have an accumulation of water. If you're just gonna use bark or charcoal, let's say, or things that are not absorbent, you'll have that water just pooling at the bottom, and that is a no-no. You want to have something that will get that water and spread it evenly throughout the mixture. And sphagnum moss is one of the best materials that I know of that can do that. There aren't many other materials that I would use with orchids. Maybe not even cocoa peat, to be fully honest, because it is very fine. It can clog up all of the air pockets, and that's not what we want, particularly in something like this. So I would suggest a mixture of sphagnum moss and bark. Depending on your environment, you can add more or less sphagnum moss. I can make a mixture of 50-50. You can make a mixture of 20% sphagnum moss and the rest bark, or whatever you'd like to use. Just make sure that that sphagnum moss is layered kind of evenly throughout the mix, just so you have moisture evened out. You don't have it pooling at the bottom. That is very, very important. And speaking about that, how about fake bottoms or drainage layers? I would advise against it. Hear me out. I have a video on it. I'll just give you the short resume right now. Hear me out. So as I was saying, you're gonna have water pooling here. Obviously, if you have a shallow container, drainage layers don't make any type of sense because the roots will grow in there anyway. There's no drainage when it comes to something like this. You'd rather have something evenly moist than having a pool of water here in the drainage layer. So let's consider this is taller, right? And you have that drainage layer at the bottom, deep down in the pot. You have a layer of leca perhaps or little rocks, and then you start with your potting mix. Well, yeah, the water will initially fall in there, but then your potting mix will dry. It will not be evenly moist because when you pour water inside, let's say you pour it on the side or in the middle, you don't pour it even. You don't run the water throughout, right? To make sure everything is wet. You pour it unevenly. So the part of the medium that you poured water on will be slightly moist, but the rest will be dry. And there's no way of that other media hydrating because there's no water contact. All of the water will pool in the drainage layer and nobody will be able to get to it, not even the sphagnum moss. But that's just the beginning. As you continue to add water, that drainage layer will fill more and more and more and more with water because guess what? Once it's at the bottom, it's not going to evaporate that fast because it has no contact with air. So water will just accumulate there. It will not evaporate. So it will accumulate up until it reaches the potting mix, the roots and all of those things. So why are we making the drainage layer in the first place if the end result is the same? We're just gonna have water at the bottom. It makes no sense. In these setups, that you cannot make like bioactive or anything like you would do in terrariums. They might be shallow, they might just trap that water and create a very, very oxygen depleted environment for your roots. No, it's a no-no. Your roots will rot. Don't put fake layers in something like this or fake bottoms or drainage layers, unnecessary. What you need to do is aim for evenness and balance. Everything is balance. I like balance. Trust me when I say that I cannot exist without balance. It's a thing I'm not gonna go into. Rest assured that what I'm doing here will be evenly moist, very balanced, very airy at the same time. You will not have excess water pooling at the bottom. That's not what we want. It's not oxygenated water. It does not have even access to light. Right, next would be watering. How do we water these orchids? Well, just like any other orchid. The way that I water, I would say. No, we're not gonna go to the sink and run water through the pot because there's no drainage. By the way, I like to see the Nasturtianum just flow whimsically. Right. And we're also not going to soak anything because we're gonna have some issues removing the water from here. We're gonna have to tilt the pot, everything will fall. Yeah, so what we need to do is get a watering can. I'll get my watering can. Hold on. There we go. I'm not gonna show you with water because I already watered these. I use this watering can with all of my orchids. I use it with these orchids as well, and I just pour some water on the top. How much water? You gotta develop a feel for it. Start with a little and see when the orchid requires more water. How do we see? Well, it starts to shrivel. That's why I'm saying if you're an absolute beginner, don't do this. Get to know orchids first and then maybe attempt something like this. So you have to read the orchid from its leaves, from its pseudobulbs. You can also squish a little bit. If it sounds crinkly, the moss when it's dry, it sounds very crinkly, then it's dry. See how much that quantity of water lasted you. If it lasted you 3 days and your schedule is a little bit too busy, you're aiming for 5 days, add just a little bit more water the next time. Keep in mind these quantities might change with seasons and with whatever is happening in your grow room pretty much. So you have to develop the feel for it. You have to trial and error stuff. And I think I just gave you a keyword. What about when we err? What about when we put too much water and after a week or 10 days it's still soaking wet? What do we do then? Fear not. I do have a solution for you to get the water out. And it doesn't imply you tipping over the pot. Obviously, if you have too much water, tipping it over might make some of that water fall, but at some point you won't be able to tip over the pot without spilling the orchid as well, right? So let me show you what I came up with. You get an absorbent cloth, you get a bamboo skewer. You can use microfiber or just something that is absorbent. I think this is cotton. If you are not sure if your cloth is very absorbent, use a microfiber cloth that is very absorbent. Put the tip of the bamboo skewer on one end, and this might get messy. Let's do it with this one. And insert it into the side of the pot like this. And just let it be. And that water will get absorbed by the cloth. And the more you leave the cloth there, the more water will absorb. Yes, you will create a bit of a mess, but medium can be rearranged. It's fine. And in this way, you can absorb the excess amounts of water in your pot. You will not be able to absorb 100% of the water, but you will get out enough that everything will be okay with your orchid. You can even do, like, not a cloth, you can do a little wick as well connected to a cloth if this is too much and you don't want to mess around with the layering. Let me get a microfiber wick. There, we get one of these. This is coming from a mop. I always use it as wicks. And you can connect this to another cloth. Inside, you can insert it, let's say, on one of the sides. And actually, this one goes in a little bit more. And then this connects to another absorbent cloth. And there you go. You have an absorbent connection here. Why am I using a bamboo skewer? Because my finger is a little bit too large and I will disturb the medium a little too much. That's why I'm using this. Just insert it there however you can, and this is how you get the water out of the pot. Because yes, you will do some mistakes maybe at some point. It happens, it's absolutely fine. Oh, right, so yeah, you'll do some mistakes and it's absolutely fine. This is how you correct them. And the frequency of watering, there's no golden rule how long your orchids should stay dry. It depends on your environment and your orchid, but to give you like a generalized safety rule to start with, at least, aim for your orchid to be watered every 7 days. That should be absolutely fine. If it dries in 5 to 7 days, I think you're fine and you're safe. In this amount of time, I find that the air pockets dry and retain oxygen and the roots use that oxygen. I just find it works. Why it works, I don't know. But it's not a golden rule. Start with this. If you find your orchid sits wet for more than 7 days, do the wicking trick and see in time if your orchid is actually good with more than 7 days being wet. It's not a golden rule. One more thing I just realized I forgot to address is fertilizer. I already repotted this and I realized I didn't talk about fertilizer. In this scenario, it is highly, highly important that we do not overdo it with fertilizer because we cannot soak and flush the orchids. Now, not flushing orchids is not the end of the world. It doesn't mean your orchid will not do well. I never flush my orchids. Never. Not one single time. I can't, I don't have time for it. And it's fine, as long as we're careful not to overdo it with fertilizer. So either we're gonna use a quarter, a half of the recommended amount just to keep it safe, either we're gonna use slow release fertilizer and call it a day. And that's what I'm gonna do in the case of these orchids. If I feel a little lazy and I have already prepared fertilized water, I'm gonna use the fertilized water. But most likely, these guys will have a different watering schedule from my other orchids. I'll be a little bit more careful with these guys, so I'm just gonna use plain water with them, and that is absolutely fine. They have slow release fertilizer, and I just added a few beads, and that will be okay for them. They're not very heavy feeders as it is, and if I ever see deficiencies, I'm just gonna stick in some more fertilizer beads and call it a day. So with fertilizer, less is better in this scenario, because imagine if you have excess fertilizer in there, ain't nobody getting it out. Pros and cons, but with this, I think you're gonna be much, much safer from overdoing it. But that is about it on the theory. How about we get to pot something, right? Right, I'm gonna pot another bulbophyllum, spoilers, and I will use this bowl. So let me make some room here on my potting table and I will be right back. Alright, so the bulbophyllum we're gonna pot is this guy. This is a division from my daisy chain cross purpuratum. Purpuratum? I don't remember. You're gonna have the tag on the screen. I cut away a dried root there. As any repotting goes, we need to make sure that our orchid doesn't have dead roots when we repot it. So I'm gonna remove those. I'm gonna remove some of these extra sheaths as well. I want to restart kind of this orchid because it grew so big that it's unmanageable, and you can see it's slightly dehydrated. I have some issues keeping it hydrated. and it grew at a very weird angle. So you know what? I think I'm gonna restart it. Yes, it's a nice dream to have a big orchid with a lot of flowers, but it doesn't flower even properly because it's just not in a good situation. So I was thinking to restart it like this. I'm gonna try with a small division first in something like this, and then I will try with multiple divisions in a bigger container. We'll see which one grows better. I find that sometimes orchids, the bigger they are, the harder it is for me to properly take care of them, and they don't flower properly. Obviously, it doesn't happen with all orchids. With Cattleyas, no, the bigger they are, the better, but bulbophyllums are just too thirsty for my capabilities. Maybe in my new environment it will be different. I'm really hoping to. Right, so for now I'm gonna experiment with this tiny division. So we are going to use bark and sphagnum moss. I like to use the Best Grow sphagnum moss, and here I have some Orchiata bark that a lovely viewer sent to me, Maya again, and I will mix those. At the bottom I always like to place sphagnum moss. Yes, quite the opposite of a drainage layer, right? Well, I want that water that pools at the bottom to not stay pooling on the water. This does not absorb water, especially when it's fresh, especially Orchiata. It's designed to last you a long time, so it's really non-absorbent at the beginning. This will be our aeration material, but I want that water to not pool. I want it to be wicked from the very bottom here, wicked and just trapped in the structures of the sphagnum moss, and this sphagnum moss will connect to another layer above it, and it will distribute the water very, very, very nicely. And again, I really am careful with this. I take pride in developing the best sandwich of potting mix possible, so everything will be very even. Then I'm gonna go with some aeration materials. Then I'm gonna add another layer of sphagnum moss. And yes, my sphagnum moss is dry. You can absolutely pre-wet it before working with it. It's gonna make it easier to work with. I just would like to keep it dry during the move. And also I'm a little lazy to water it, to be honest. Right, so again, another layer of sphagnum moss and another layer of bark, aeration material. And this, on the next sphagnum moss layer, is where we're gonna plant the orchid because it has very shallow roots, as you can see. So we're gonna put another layer. Again, on this layer, I'm gonna put another thing. I'm gonna put the slow release fertilizer, and this will be the only fertilizer this orchid will get. It's not a heavy feeder, so the few beads that I'm gonna add in here will be enough for this year. So on top here, let's make it a little bit more cushiony. On top here, we're gonna add this guy. Direction of growth is this way. So I'm gonna try to place this more to the side and the new growth more towards the center, just to give me more time in this pot. There we go. At this point, I'm gonna actually put a little bit more sphagnum moss. The top layers of sphagnum moss, even though very absorbent, they will also have to fight gravity a little bit. So just to help distribute the water even better, I'm gonna put a little bit more sphagnum moss here on the upper layers. I know I am so pedantic with this, but it pays off. Every little detail pays off, and it will make this experience of the non-drainable pot a lot better. Right, so this is as much sphagnum moss as I think I need. And then I'm gonna top it off with bark. I do this because I want to avoid cyanobacteria, and if I do not allow light on top of the sphagnum moss, which will be moist a lot, I limit the photosynthesis of the cyanobacteria, so it actually does not form. And cover all of the sphagnum moss. Even if some of the pseudobulbs you see are a little bit buried, it's fine, it's not that buried. They're just very tiny, and the bark pieces are a little big. They are still airy because the bark, you know, retains a lot of air pockets. So they're not going to rot or anything. They're not that buried. And the pieces of bark are not that tiny. And we are about done. Let's use these pieces that fell. I think we're pretty good. And now let's water it. So I have here just plain water, no fertilizer, and I'm just going to add it. I know already how much water I can put. It looks like a lot, but it's not really, because that sphagnum moss is completely dry. So it will even out. I'm gonna check back tomorrow how everything looks. We are done potting this bulbophyllum. Alrighty, and that is about it. My orchid is potted. And as closing thoughts, why would you go for non-drainage? Well, because you can put it anywhere and it just looks nice. It kind of looks nice, pretty much. That's all there is to it. But also it can retain more water than conventional, very, very ventilated pots. For the right orchid and the right environment and the right location, it might be exactly what you need. Plus, as I was saying, I can put it anywhere. It's not gonna leak, it's not gonna stain anything, it's not going to ruin any furniture. If I want to display it in my living room, it's absolutely fine. I also like the weight of these bowls, to be fully honest, because some orchids can get top heavy. Bulbophyllums not so much unless they start to spill over, but it's just a very nice decorative piece that will not ruin anything and will stay moist. Cons, you can absolutely kill your orchid. I mean, it can happen. So if you feel safer not to do this, then don't. Just stick to the traditional way of growing orchids and everything will be absolutely fine. But if you feel like you could benefit from something like this, and I really like it for bulbophyllums, then I hope this video helps you out. Keep in mind all of these things that I talked about because I'm speaking from my own experience, and I think you'll be absolutely fine with this. Remember, even if you don't like sphagnum moss, you need a little bit of sphagnum moss in here. If you just use bark, I don't see it going down very well. I just don't. It's not gonna be even. You're gonna have that water pooling at the bottom, suffocating roots. Just don't. Better just not do it at all if you're not willing to put a little sphagnum moss in there. And also make sure you use good quality sphagnum moss. Not those very cheap, very compressed, tiny little bricks on eBay and Amazon. No, those are horrible. Don't use those. Like, they go bad in a month. Don't use those. Good quality New Zealand sphagnum moss is what you need. Right, so with that said, I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you Skillshare for sponsoring yet another video. And I hope this was helpful. Let me know in the comments if you do grow some of your orchids in drainageless pots, and how does it go for you? What orchids are you growing? Let us know. Right, so with that said, I hope you'll have a great day and I'll see you next time. Bye!